Oh, you're on mute, Gaio.
Thank you, Melissa.
Hi.
I
Hey,
totally
thanks.
take that in.
Thanks, Melissa.
Go on.
Welcome to the fifth world here in Mount Shasta. Hey, Zion, great to see you. I recognize a couple faces here. Great to see you, Zion. I know we haven't talked in a while.
Great to see you too, Michael. Thank you all.
Yeah. And hey, everyone else. Wow, we got quite a crowded room today. There's, hey, James, I remember you from last time. Great, so thanks, Melissa. Oh, I see you got a fish behind you today, so you got a tree and a fish now. Awesome. Hey, Jamin.
Welcome, Michael. I was just getting everyone prepped for you, so
Yeah.
you are good to go. So rock on, Michael.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. All right. Well, since we just got an hour, we'll jump right into it. So, for those of you who are new, this has been I've been doing a little bit of an ongoing series each week in this general area of myth and mythos and narrative and things like this, but also extending them quite a bit out to topics of consciousness and extending it to collective intelligence and trying to weave it all together. So Jamin asked me earlier this week what the topic was for today, and I decided to tackle what's called narrative reframing, or better said, restorying is maybe a better term. And so there's quite a bit to talk about in that topic of restoring, and it may be appropriate to do another session another time. So I'm just going to do it. And I was pretty busy this week, so I literally just took the last hour before this call to throw together a bit of a PowerPoint presentation and just kind of go into the basics of what we're talking about when we're talking about restoring or narrative framing, and then just open it up for discussions like we normally do. That's when the really good stuff happens. So let's just jump right in. I'm going to give just a little presentation on what restoring and what narrative reframing is, and then we can discuss. So let's see. I want to share again my keynote. Share my screen. There we go. Can you all see the keynote screen?
Yep, we see it. Thanks, Michael.
Great. And I wonder, did we solve this last time? How can I actually play it?
I would maybe, is it Keynote Live? There should be a button that'll do full screen presentation mode. I'm looking for it.
There's Keynote Live.
Is that the one, or is that something else? That's probably something else.
You set up iCloud. So, I mean, if I press play.
How about view?
Can you see it?
We see a blank screen right now. Slide 1 is blank.
Yeah,
Advance it now.
Let me try. Let me just do a little experiment here. I'm going to try moving this over here. No, I was putting it on the other screen. Let me unshare and share again. Then hold on a second.
And Michael, actually, where it says view in the far upper left, there may be a way to that if you click on that drop down, it may take you to view, slideshow or something like that.
Okay. I think I've got it here. 1 second.
And Jamin, just while you have a moment for him to do that, I did have a few people join the last minute, but they're going to be on as we come back to the SRM discussion. But if you just want to give like a 2-minute intro of the think tank here and what we're doing collectively, just one more time, it'd be great for those that just jumped on.
Oh yeah. If you don't mind, Michael, I'll do as.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, there's a lot to say about what we're doing here. It's there's a lot of complexity in a very good way to what we're doing. But the basic idea is it's like an open source think tank and community of people dedicated to applying our collective intelligence to solving our most daunting problems, starting with exponential planetary overheating. How do we cool the planet? And then there's myriad other problems that are of frankly lesser urgency, but are also very, very important. And there's a huge opportunity to address multiple problems with holistic solutions and sets of solutions which work together, like the 15,000 pieces in an automobile, like the Tesla truck Michael had up in his screen a moment ago, so that they all work together to produce a set of outcomes that's desirable: cooling the planet, feeding people, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the big picture in a nutshell, and we can talk more about that later. If anyone has questions, very happy to talk about that later. And some of it we actually address right here with Michael in terms of creating a new story for humanity. That's like a big meta solution in and of itself. So with that, back to you, Michael.
Thank you,
Thanks, Jamin.
Jamin. And thanks, Madison, for joining us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Madison. Welcome.
All right, can you all see?
Yeah, that seems to be the ticket
Okay.
there, Michael. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So the topic today is restorying, which is the process of reconstructing new meaning from old narratives. And this is really basic stuff once we get into it, but it's surprising how often we don't really apply it. And as I go through this, there's just about maybe 7 or 8 slides here, and talk about restoring and narrative therapy from this perspective. It's it's made for this presentation is mainly kind of directed at how to apply this to individuals, because that's the whole point, that individuals largely carry stories, and the process of restoring and the process of narrative reframing is largely towards individual stories. But as we've discussed before, individuals make up a collective, and the healthier our individuals, the healthier our collective, and the greater result we may have in engendering collective intelligence with our healthy individuals. But also, keep in mind as we're reviewing these principles of restoring, how, if possible, can we also extend these principles to restory our collective narratives, the ones we're all sharing together. So here's a good quote by Genevieve Boast. "Our human world is made of stories. They flow through the veins of our societies like blood, unseen and yet vital to the course of our lives. They are our primary way of making sense of our experiences and the course of our lives, personally and collectively."
Beautiful.
And now here's some more kind of setup description here to put restoring in context. And this is some text I borrowed off of a website that has a lot to do with restoring. And it says, "The world is entering into a process of restoring itself. Individuals, communities, and cultures are discovering that their old narratives no longer make sense in our globalized society. The legends and lessons of the past can be utilized to fuel the mythology of our shared future, but only if we are able to jump beyond the confines of our narrative identities. We are being given the chance to be reborn and restory what it means to be human. Myth itself is a transformative structure that can either inspire us into new ways of thinking and acting, or scare us into holding back and limiting ourselves within the safe confines of old habits. The good news is that all over the world, we are starting to see people challenge the old myths. We are beginning to rewrite our human stories to change the course of our future. We are reinventing our collective human purpose and identity." So, to get into some of the principles, the very basic principles of restoring, restoring is, one way to change your life is to restore your life. So if we want transformation at the individual level, consider looking at the story of your life. And if we want to change the way a planet is transforming, maybe we can look at the way our planet story has evolved. So 3 ways we learn to frame our life stories, and this is more like the ways that we commonly do it, that result in what we call conditioning. That we're highly conditioned by the stories we're already holding. They're from family myths, all the stories and internalization of events that's happened with our families, descriptions of the people we are, the stories we tell about ourselves to ourselves, and even traumatic events. And again, in our individual lives and our collective lives, as we had discussed a couple weeks ago when I was sharing the Gaia hypothesis and the idea of how previous traumatic events in the history of humanity, going back even thousands or hundreds of thousands of years, could very well still be influencing us today. And so here are 3 questions to ask for our stories. Is the story you're telling, is it serving you well? Is there a different point of view that changes the story? And does the story inspire others? Because if it's not inspiring others, maybe it's not a good story to share. maybe not. We can discuss that. So, when it comes to restoring, there's probably all kinds of different techniques. But one I'm mostly familiar with is called narrative therapy. And this is actually a type of mental health therapy that was developed in the 1980s. That again is based on really fundamental principles that basically is meant to help people see themselves as separate from their issues and problems. It's really a matter of identity. Identity is huge, especially in the world today. We're hearing so much about identity in the technosphere today, and our personal data and all this stuff. Identity is a really deep topic that we can get very psychological on and all that. But just to approach it very directly, the common psychology here is that people tend to identify with their problems. And when that happens, then when we identify with our problems, it can tend to both confuse both who we are, because we're not the problem, and it can also confuse the problem because we tend to think it has to do with us as people rather than the problem itself. And so that's the main point of narrative therapy, is really clarify the separation, the distinction between a person and the environment of issues they may be either living with or still carrying in themselves. So that's the primary aim of narrative therapy. And here's four ways that narrative therapy does that. It helps people. The first is helping people develop their narrative. So often a lot of us just go through life and without ever really considering what the narrative we've been living is or what the story is. And if they're needing help in some way, if they're facing issues and problems they can't seem to overcome, then it can help to first develop the narrative itself. Just go through a process of examining how our life events have unfolded over time. And figure out what it is and figure out how to tell it. If a person can speak their own story, then they begin to really know it. So also in this first stage of developing your narrative, this can also help that once you start getting everything laid out on a timeline, it's one way of basically organizing, just getting it all out there, then it's possible to begin to see patterns, and often patterns of repetition. There might be a certain type of event that's not favorable or negative, that's happening again and again and again. And often we don't even really realize that there's a repetition. So developing your narrative is essential to be able to see that just like it's kind of like driving a car with a blindfold on, or driving a car without any rear view mirror, or driving a car without transparent windows. It just helps us be able to see where we've been and the patterns that are happening that are bound to tell us where we're still going to go. So that's the first step. Second step is called externalization. And fundamentally, that means what I was talking about before, is that externalization means you are not your problem. It's making that separation of people and problems, so that rather than internalize our problems, you're making the problem about us, or making us the problem, we externalize that and objectify it. So it's distinguishing oneself from the problems in an objective, non-judgmental view. Once this objectivity is realized, then it becomes possible to see how change can happen. Because before, again, if the problem is fused to the person, it often doesn't seem like change can really happen, because that means you need to change somehow. And often that's not the case. Sometimes that's the case, but often that's not the case. That sometimes we just get so mixed up with our problems that we can externalize it, and then we can objectively see how that problem can change without us really having to change so much. So number 3 is deconstruction. And this kind of goes with number 1 in the sense that there's a typical response when people even arrive to step 1 of developing their narrative and considering all of their life events. It can be a bit overwhelming, and it can cause anxiety in itself. So simply said, deconstruction is just the process and various modalities of working with your story in a way that's piece by piece and step by step, rather than having to figure it all out at one time. And then outcomes is simply working with people in a way that helps them see that there can often be more than one outcome to any current narrative. If we have a story we know we're currently living in, it's very easy to get fixated that it's going to have a specific outcome. And it's simply working in a way that allows for multiple outcomes to be possible. Like a choose your own adventure book. We have choice. We're not victims to our fate, although fate can be useful sometimes. There's a lot of freedom in co-creating our stories together, understanding the options. So this goes back to, what's that?
Would you permit me a quick comment if you go back to the previous?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So this is really interesting, because this, I'm listening to this at the level of the individual. Earlier today, during Dr. Silas Rao's presentation, it came up in the Anthropocene. A lot of people are looking at the effects of what humanity is doing to the planet, right? And internalizing it to humanity and saying, QED, therefore we suck, right? Versus we externalize, or anyway, I just wanted to throw that in. Versus, and then we worked at, working on other alternative narratives other than we suck because we caused this. Looking at a bigger time frame, et cetera, we're able to externalize it. It's not us who are choosing this. It's, anyway, back to you, Michael. I just wanted to throw that as a comment as to the collective narrative.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. That's a completely appropriate point. And, I really should have inserted that myself. Absolutely. That's really getting to the primary aim of this presentation is, how do we deliver this to the world? Because that is completely happening. I think that we've largely internalized the problems in the world as a collective. And how can we begin to go through these steps as a collective and get the problems outside of us and objectify them so that we can solve them more appropriately as a collective. And following your comment, going back, this is a slide from a couple of weeks ago from Mulgan from the Big Mind book, which Big Mind is an excellent book about collective intelligence that Jamin introduced me to. The quote is, "We are bound together not just by interests and habits, but by meaning and stories." So, it goes both ways too. The individual stories we're telling ourselves and the individual stories we're each internalizing or externalizing about the state of the world, we're also sharing with others. And so it's a little bit viral, or is it a lot viral? So I think we do have a bit of a responsibility as individuals to restory our own stories, at least about the state of the world. That way we can share, and in fact, aren't these words interesting? Because the words I'm choosing right now, what's so in the story right now is this virus going on. And look how the media is presenting the story. It's a tricky one. I mean, we let's open it up and talk about this. That's the basics of it. I'll stop sharing and come back. Comments, questions, insights, stories, strategies. Go. Anyone?
It's open mic time. No one's in the queue, so just jump in. It's open mic with Michael.
Hey, Miles. How's it going?
It's going pretty good. Every time I go downtown, I learn about new bylaws. It's actually quite humorous. So today's bylaw lesson is, if you have a great big suitcase, you're not allowed into the central library. So, because I thought I would just go there and relax and connect from there, but they wouldn't let me through the doors because I had my great big suitcase with my speaker in. So
go ahead.
So I bought this speaker. It's a Bluetooth speaker, and it allows you to also use a microphone. So I thought, if I can get established hosting, some education sessions, study groups, whatever we want to call them, I would have a microphone so people could be heard clearly. And it also works on Bluetooth. So I thought, okay, I'm taking it with me down to City Hall so people can hear Dr. Rao and everyone else during Dr. Rao's presentation. However, it's weird. I don't know how it would know, but the Zoom conference would not broadcast over the speaker. Yet I know the Bluetooth was working because I could go to my app for music and it was broadcasting my music. So anyway, you can only go in with 2 carry-on size bags to the central library, is the new bylaw of the day. So I just rushed home from Second Cup Coffee Shop, where I was listening to the last part of the previous conversation. I stopped in for a coffee, and then I heard you were presenting, so I rushed home from there.
Oh, cool.
And here I am. So I guess you're talking about wanting to share stories and myths, and I think that's just really a powerful thing to do, because everybody has a story. And what I learned in this regard about 5 years ago was from Professor Stephen Resnick, who is a good friend of Professor Richard D. Wolff, who Jamin knows, maybe you do too, Michael. Richard D. Wolff is reputably the leading economics professor in the area of understanding Karl Marx that there is down in the United States. And Stephen Resnick was his very dear friend. And I was trying to reach out to Stephen Resnick because he'd said something that it just struck me like an epiphany. And it was just like, oh my. And since I had had success in communicating with Richard D. Wolff 5 years ago, and he actually was emailing me back and he was giving me suggestions as how to respond to things that are happening in my city. Because of the success of actually establishing a personal connection with Richard Wolff, I thought, well, I'll reach out to Stephen Resnick. I was sad to hear, though, that he had passed away like a year previously. But what he said, and I will conclude with this, what Professor Resnick said is that George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, Hegel, who is a philosopher of the 18th century, so in other words, the 1700s. Hegel, among many other things which I don't necessarily understand, he did say one thing that I think is fairly easy to grasp, and that is that if we all each look at our story, our individual myth, because myth actually comes from the word communication. So as you've probably explained, I think you have in the previous, that you can't just go with the typical definition of myth, which is now more usually construed to mean something like a fairy tale or not true. Myth actually comes from the word to communicate. So Hegel said, if everybody steps back and looks at the sum total of every experience, every lesson, every life experience, your education, the relationships you've made and relationships that have failed, all the good and the bad, it all points to a truth. Now, some people will say, well, there's not just one truth. Well, who knows whether that's true or not. But anyway, Hegel's perspective is that we all have a common truth at some point. If we all look at our stories, we'll see that they converge. So I don't know if you want to riff on that, Michael.
Yeah, I think they would. They would, like the in many ways, I think they would. I saw a graphic recently. Just the first thing that comes to mind. I saw a graphic recently that shows, it was an infographic. It shows how you're at the top, one person, and then you have these two parents, and then your two parents, they had four. Those are your grandparents, and those had 16 and 32, and it went down each generation by generation. By the time it got to 1400 AD, the time of the Renaissance in Italy, your ancestors were something like, I can't remember the exact number. It was something like 14 billion or something like this. It was twice the population of the earth. Right? Is that true? It made sense by looking at it. I guess it's true that we're all very, very related. Going back, we all have ancestors going back much sooner than the Renaissance, which is not that long ago. So that's one truth. And I'm sure it goes deeper. I'm sure it goes much, much, much deeper. I think, how deep does it really go? When I think about meaning in general, I think about it in a very metaphysical context. That I think I've worked on this before. It's good to visit again. And thanks for that. That myth means to communicate, and what does meaning really mean? And I don't know what the exact etymology is. I've probably looked it up before, but what I've discerned a lot about meaning is the word mean is in meaning, and not the mean kind of like angry mean, but the mathematical mean. Meaning, when you draw a mean average on something, you're kind of getting the middle of it. Right? You could do a mean graph, shooting down the middle. So this meaning means kind of like to find what you're saying, to find the commonality between things, to find the balance between things, to find the coherent integration and balance between anything. It's this quality of consciousness and awareness, I would say, that goes very, very deep, even into the core of what intelligence and awareness is itself. Saying that I think there's a fundamental quality of the universe, of reality, that is always differentiating things and always bringing things into balance at the finest levels. And so meaning is right there. You know, when we commonly think of meaning, we're talking about, you know, what do you mean, or what was the meaning of that myth, or what was the meaning of that movie, what was the meaning of that story. We say, well, meaning could really even go much deeper in this very abstract sense. It's just this most fundamental way of discerning and balancing anything at all, even atoms and quarks. Hey, Jamin, yeah.
Yeah, when you said that about the mean, the mathematical mean, the average,
Mhm.
that's just totally got my wheels turning now. Because if you think about it, like if you're a 4-year-old kid and you have this amazing dream, and then you wake up and then you say, you know, mom, dad, brother, sister, I just saw all these purple unicorns and went to the moon and came, and then that didn't really happen. You were dreaming. Why? Because it's not the mean. It's the other people in your family didn't have that experience. So they say, therefore it's not
Right.
real. And then we get trained to say, okay, that's not real. That's not real. And so when we go to the dream world, by the time we're a teenager, we just totally discount it. Right. But that experience is as real to me as the one I'm having right now. It's just that we're taught to basically go with the center of the herd. Go to the center. What's the center thinking? Duh. Anyway, I'd love to hear from our artists who live in the dream world. Any thoughts on that? Yourself included, Michael.
Thanks. Shyla, were you going to say something? No.
Well, I'll just chip in one more thing. So, that mean that there is a coming together at some point on the bell curve that there is in a sense something common, a truth. And one of the truths is that we are all sharing the same planet. Doesn't matter where you are right now on this call. There is this one Earth as we know, and there's no planet B that we know of or could get to quickly because we don't even know if there's one out there. So that is a truth, and that we have to work together to restore it to vitality. So, what other, and so far as other truths, at least that is a common truth.
It is a common truth, but not everyone's commonly aligned to that. And I just, your insight gave me an insight, Jamin, and what you're saying now too is maybe helping me clarity. And I just drew it over here. I drew the little bell curve. And I'm thinking, so like, Jamin, the way you're describing, like as your example is, and we can make many different examples. The boy wakes up from the dream. It was real for him, full of meaning in his little world. His parents say, no, we don't get that. Therefore, it's not true. It's not meaningful to us. Therefore, spank, whatever, right? Suffering happens. So, and for anything, any collective truth, if the individual is outside of that, he's going to get punished or ridiculed or criticized potentially, or fined. You get a fine, or can't carry your suitcase into the library because the collective says no, right? And so I am abstracting it out further because there's a model I have too when I'm thinking about meaning in general, that whenever an individual is suffering, I think every time, it might be an absolute, that any time we're feeling suffering or pain or confusion, it's because we are resonating to a meaning that is less real, or we've made it less real, or there's something more real and we feel it at some level. We may not know what that more real thing is, or we're being told it's something different. This is when cognitive dissonance comes in. Two people disagree about something because we're aligned to our meaning structures, and now we're trying to figure out which ones, either how do we integrate it into one that we can both agree upon, or is there a greater one that we don't realize yet? But the result is we're suffering because there's a sense of that meaning that goes so deep in us. It's so much a part of our identity. If it becomes part of our identity, that's the result of suffering. Hey, James. Oh, Shiloh's speaking too. You're muted, Shiloh.
Oh, I would have waited. I just was hoping that before you're done, you would kind of go over maybe number 3 and 4, the deconstruction and outcomes. I'm just thinking now bigger picture and trying to put that together. So, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. So, you know, so we're talking about deconstruction of the collective stories that we're talking about, and then outcomes of the collective story. Yeah, great question. So, you know, that's a really good question. Thank you. So deconstruction would be, you know, the process of getting the whole story out there, but doing it in a way that's not overwhelming, piece by piece. So where would we begin with the collective story? My first response is, and I'd love to hear from other people, but my first response is that, you know, I've thought about this a lot. I tend to gravitate towards our deep history, like I think we would do with an individual too. If we're going to deconstruct, or, you know, well, I go into our deep history, but now I'm wondering, you know, I'm also wondering that from a proper deconstruction process, if an individual has a direct problem, then you might want to begin deconstructing the story around that particular problem, right? So, you know, we would then collectively identify what's the main problem. We've done some of that here in this group. Yeah, good question. You know, again, in either case, I tend to gravitate towards the deep history, because I feel as I presented here before in this group with what I call the Gaia hypothesis, is that I see that most, or possibly all, but most of our large scale problems today, meaning environmental collapse, pollution, financial breakdown, all these things, all these major problems, I see have a more fundamental root that's psychological in the collective unconscious, that could be rooted largely to previous traumatic events in our collective history. And so focusing on that narrative first might be a way to resolve the ones present, the present problems. Or we could isolate the present problem, like what we're doing with global warming and the solar remediation management. What would be the story around that? And what would be the story around, like, so that's actually a solution. But the problem it's serving, you know, what's the story around that, and how can we unite the problem of the solution to the problem in a coherent narrative? I'm just brainstorming here. What do you guys think?
I like that, and I was thinking the same thing. Like, that's kind of what we're doing right now, is bringing attention to all these problems. And I like the idea of paying attention with her and then connecting the problem to the new picture and how to do that, I suppose. So, got it.
Mm-hmm. Any other comments? Yeah, James.
Yeah, just getting back to what you were saying about the suffering again there earlier. Yeah, I believe that we, like, we're suffering because we're separate from our story, or separated from our story, our personal stories, like, which extends way back into our distant, you know, our distant past, or of our own genetic line, I should say, like, and Yeah, so we lost the epigenetic. Modern society has lost the epigenetic part of our own story because of having to conform to modern society, and in that's what we have lost, the what we call ourselves the modern society anyway. We've lost that because of conforming to modern society, whereas the indigenous peoples never lost that epigenetic trait because they instill it constantly in their children. So they've never lost track or never lost sight of their story. We have. That's causes our suffering. So I agree with what you're saying.
Mhm. I would say specifically, yeah, we've lost contact with it. But the thing is, it's still living in us. And that's the idea, is that if we're still enduring traumatic memories from the past, we're still connected with them. We're just not fully connected with them, and that's causing the suffering.
Yeah, I agree, but but the suffering comes from not being able to tap into them or understand them. They're inherent in us, but we still can't decipher them. That causes the suffering. Our inability to decipher our own story, so to speak, it causes the suffering. You know, it is in us. It's in us inherently. I agree with that.
Right.
But we've
Right.
lost touch with. We've lost touch with it. That's what separates us from the indigenous people, I think.
Mhm. Mhm. Hey, Jamin. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of our current story around climate change and what to do about it, um, I'm just noticing, and this gets back to the mean, kind of what's commonly believed, the center of the bell curve. Well, the bell curve was first created, whatever, in the 60s, 70s, but really started getting traction in the 80s and 90s, that there's greenhouse gases and that we're overheating and all that. And so immediately appended to that story of the problem is the solution. We need to reduce emissions, we need to sequester carbon. And that mean story, that center of the pack, that middle of the pack, has had so much inertia that to this day, Microsoft, which recently announced $1 billion fund to, for climate change, you read the details, it's how do we decarbonize, right? And there's not even a place for an alternate story there. The alternate story of SRM as the urgent solution, period, not decarbonization, but SRM, it's nowhere near the common narrative. And therefore it's just not there. It's way out on a fringe. And if you talk about it to people who are more in the center, they just, oh, that's just one of those geoengineering nuts. No, that's geoengineering is bad. And they've already got all these reasons for why it's bad, because these reasons help prop up the drawdown story, the decarbonization story. And that's something we've been struggling with, is that so many people are just so wedded to the carbon story and the decarbonization story.
Right.
Problem carbon, solution decarbonization. I mean, it's like, what part of that don't you understand? All right. And so it just gets reinforced and reinforced, and it has all this inertia. And that's why we're just way out on the fringe, with Dr. Yatow at Harvard and Professor Guy McPherson, et cetera, and all of us, or most of us, I would say, and I just wanted to call that out as a serious issue, because if we don't change that story, if we don't get some plasticity, if we don't get some story therapy of the kind that Michael is offering, we might be stuck on this toboggan ride to the edge of the cliff and then down to the rocks below, Wile E. Coyote style. Anyway, back to you guys.
Yeah, another great point, Jamin. And I think about that same kind of pattern in context of a few different stories on planet Earth right now, where, well, two things. What you're sharing. I'm not intimately familiar with the details of the contention in those stories, but I often wonder with things like that how money might be involved too, meaning that certain companies, that it's good. We got to use the money to drive the solutions forward and actually do real things for the planet. But then, a certain corporation starts finding the solution, and then all of a sudden, they're also going to make a profit off it because they need to sustain the business. There's no reason not to make money off of it. But then as we've discussed before, money has such a profound place on the collective mean curve right now. It's kind of like the default meaning orientation, right? Kind of the central one. It's been misplaced. It's still useful. Money's useful, but it's really this like central meaning beacon. So I wonder how that can come in. We're like, because of course, like what makes sense to me is like, well, why don't we do both? You know, there's no problem having two different groups trying out two different solutions at the same time. Are we really lacking people to do this? I don't think so. I mean, we could, I mean, it might divert resources. Like it could divert some attention and energy, but often I think like, you know, if you can do more than one experiment and implementation of something, why not? I think in the same context in the conversation around space travel right now, at least in my opinion, I think it's fine. And I think it's actually useful that we're exploring options, you know, SpaceX and Blue Origin, we're going to Mars, we're doing all this stuff. I don't see any problem with doing that while we simultaneously also fix the planet. But I tend to hear this split narrative as people are like, well, we have to stop all that and just focus completely on fixing our own planet first before we extend into outer space. And this is kind of like the outcomes thing. I think there can be multiple outcomes. One outcome I see is that through pursuing our ingenuity and innovation in becoming a multiplanetary species, it is going to be radically inspiring to see us growing and becoming something new that can aid in our transformation on planet Earth. Two, in the pathway of coming to face survival in a very hostile environment like Mars or outer space, we often invent things that can then be applied back here on Earth. And that's already been the case with the lunar missions in NASA, coming up with all kinds of innovations that we still use on Earth here today. You know, like for example, when we get to Mars, they are going to have radical innovation around water technology and you know, clean air and all this kind of stuff. All that can be used back here on Earth. In fact, I would be really surprised if there isn't that mutual exchange like that. There'll be kickbacks from Mars that are going to really help us here on Earth. So, but it's just again, getting at the point of it, it's just a consideration that we're like a giant organism with a billion little fingers, and I don't think we have to have all the fingers pointing one way all the time. And so to be able to have a narrative that allows us to at least find the balance in that. Yes, sometimes we do want to put all resources towards this. Other times, I think it makes sense to be more diverse. So, yeah. So I've said enough. Nolan, did you have something to say? I saw your hand go up.
Not in particular, but I kind of want to read some comments from Ray. He says, the dualistic take sides culture doesn't leave room for multiple solutions. Even those woke to climate change tend to have a monomania about fossil fuels and silver bullet solutions. Mm-hmm. SRM or veganism becomes a distraction. The myth of environmentalism is that the heroes are environmentalists. Send your donations, we got it covered.
Right. Yeah, good one.
Yeah, and I really hear what you're saying, Michael. I'm I want to find or help create the story that somehow encapsulates the family or the tree of stories. You know, it seems like an impossible task, but I feel like to really make collective intelligence happen, or collective superintelligence rather, we're going to need really powerful narratives that are you know, I don't know, one size fits all is the first phrase that comes to mind, which doesn't really do it justice, but I don't know. And I'm thinking like religions are examples of well, some incredibly extensive narratives that large amounts of people can unite around. And it makes me curious to look more into Guy Lane's, what did he call it? He didn't call it a religion. He called it, do you know what I'm talking about? His,
What's the belief that it centers around?
yeah, he's basically he's essentially established a new religion, like legally. It's a religion, but there's no like central deity, and it's essentially just about taking care of the planet. And the name is totally slipping from me, but
I'm looking at his website right now. You said he has a name of his religion?
Yeah, maybe I can.
Purium? Is it Purium? An integrated system of belief, knowledge, and practice for sustainability.
I think it starts with a V.
Intervene? I don't know. Interesting. I've never heard of him before. I'll check him out. Guy Lane.
Here we go. It's Vitae, Vitae. Let's see. I'll share the link in the chat here.
Vitae Planeta, the living planet. That would sound congruent with the Gaia hypothesis.
Well, it's interesting that he's focused on religion because one thing about religion is it's kind of binary. Like either I'm a Catholic or I'm a Presbyterian or I'm Buddhist or whatever. And if I say I'm a Catholic, well then automatically I just kind of like it's like a whole package deal. There's a whole package of beliefs that comes with that, as opposed to one at a time trying to ingest or not a particular belief or whatever. Anyway, that's one of the reasons I don't line up behind any particular religion, but this one sounds interesting, right? So it's like a package of, it's kind of like an iPhone. You don't go buy a transistor here, a capacitor there, some glass here and try to, throw together your own. You just go with iPhone and all the stuff that implies. You essentially go with the Apple religion, right? I mean, I'm not crazy about it, but I'm a member of the iPhone, the church of iPhone. Why? Because I'm constantly, using it for this, that, the other. So this could be a thing like that. How do we iPhoneize, saving life on Earth?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I like. Hey, let me add to that. So I mean, yeah, I don't like the idea of religion at all. I think the new meaning thing, the new thing that'll be like myth, but it won't be myth. I think it has to be fundamentally different. It has to be something entirely new. I think even calling it a religion or anything like religion won't work. I think the best type of religion we could have would be something, it would be refer to what the Gnostics were, the Gnostics in ancient history, which their fundamental beliefs were that the individual's direct experience was the basis of their, it wasn't even a religion, it was more like a cult. It was just a bunch of people that had a similar philosophy that was very essential. It was based mostly on direct experience of an individual. And then what about their direct experiences could they align on? And they could. I think it'll be based on direct experience of the individual. and it'll be highly influenced by information technology, meaning with some of the advents we have coming up with, massive data collection on a global scale, of real-time neuropathic transmissions, enhanced abilities to see and think and feel, perhaps things like this. I don't know exactly. And also, I think that it needs to point at what's called the numinous, right? The numinous, that term, numinous, means it's like, divine intelligence. It's the numinous is something much greater than ourselves that we feel is real and alive, like God. The term God, this is called the numinous. Some people, they're not religious. They can walk out into the forest and they feel the numinous. Other people, they go into a Buddhist temple and they only find it in the Buddhist temple. So they're Buddhist and they find the numinous there. The Christians find the numinous in Christ. It's this commonality of finding that thing greater than ourselves, that's a direct experience. And so I think a new religion would really need to include that in an increasingly direct way. And I don't think we've really had it yet. Religions tend to go, well, here's the book that tells you how to behave and what to do, but it's not really providing a direct access to the numinous. And I wonder what technologies might do that in the future, or what might help access that numinosity.
Well, what's interesting, Miles has had his hand up for several minutes, and then Zion has his hand up as well. But I just want to comment that that on this website, this Vitae Planeta, whatever, it's centered around having these parties around a full moon, right? Talk about newness, fullness, this experience of nature and all that. And it's really about getting people to get into conversation. Like, how did we get all these people to get into conversation right here? We threw a party, a block party. Everybody loves a party. So I think that's part of it, so it's kind of like, anyway, it's a medium basically. But anyway, Miles, you've been very, very patient. Thank you for your patience. And then Zion, if you don't mind, Michael, and then Melissa. Go ahead, Miles.
Yeah. So something you were saying earlier, Jamin, about people chasing the wrong solution. So in other words, so many people are fixated on, we got to shut down oil, gas, and coal. That's the culprit. And I was so pleased that today you saw me give Dr. Rao's white paper to Dr. Joe Vipond of Calgary Climate Healers, because Joe Vipond is always like, we got to shut down coal, got to shut down coal, got to shut down coal. And I've posted stuff in reply about, what about industrial meat and dairy? And I've never had any response. But today, I gave him personally a copy of Dr. Rao's report. In the chat, I just posted something I copied and pasted about buying a Tesla, as if Tesla's the answer, buying a Tesla. You can take a look at it in the YouTube link to this gentleman who drives across the US during summer at a time when, there aren't many electric vehicles to compete with when you go to a charging station. In summary, I'm just pointing out that if we think that shutting down oil, gas, and coal is going to address the issue, and that we all just somehow miraculously all start driving electric vehicles tomorrow, it's just crazy. That if we start building all these batteries to replace our automobiles, we're going to destroy the planet even faster, in my opinion, than sticking with fuel oil for now for our cars. What we do have to recognize is that we've developed machines to deforest. You can look up videos where there's these machines now. They just grab hold of a huge tree, they cut it, they strip it, they can even debark them right there in the forest, and they just mow through the forest in no time at all. And it's just one guy running this big monster machine. You know, at least in the old days, there was probably 100 or 200 people having to, at least earning a living, you know, to harvest trees. But now there's just one guy on a machine burning fossil fuels to deforest. What we do need is to say, okay, we've got to use this fossil fuel to reforest, proforest, not deforest. And to that end, I hope this is like the last book I buy for a while, but I bought this book. The title is On Bullshit. That's the title, On Bullshit, by Henry G. Frankfurt. Now, who would write a book about bullshit? Well, it turns out Henry G. Frankfurt is a renowned moral philosopher and is professor of philosophy emeritus at Princeton University. His books include The Reason of Love, also published by Princeton. Another book is Necessity, Volition, and Love. And then finally another book, The Importance of What We Care About. So he felt in 2005 that it was necessary to write on bullshit. And so this is a scientific treatment of the term. And it essentially, I haven't finished reading it, but he says it's connected very much with the old word humbug, but essentially deceptive misrepresentation. Short of lying, but especially by pretentious word or deed of somebody's own thoughts, feelings, or attitudes. So essentially, Elon Musk or anybody who's promoting these batteries as the viable option is quite possibly bullshitting us. They may sincerely believe they're bullshit, but it's possible they know that this is just phony baloney. But I'm going to make a fortune selling people these batteries. I could be wrong, but what I'm saying is we have to consider that it might be bullshit. And it's bullshit that we should be not focused on industrial meat and dairy, right? It's also bullshit that they told us that there's an energy shortage. You know, when we can plainly see that there's way too much energy coming in from the sun, and that a few simple mirrors can burn a hole through stainless steel if it's just focused. So anyway, I'll just conclude about that. And we need to be always on guard and somehow wake people up about, you know, what Professor Henry G. Frankfurt wrote about. Thank you.
Good stuff. Good stuff, Miles. You are our bullshit broker. Just kidding. Anyway, okay, so Zion has been waiting, and then Melissa, and I also want to give Michael Gallo an opportunity to conclude. We're 5 minutes into the next segment. Not a huge deal because the next segment starts.
No problem.
Okay, thanks.
No problem.
Thank you. All righty. So Zion, followed by Melissa.
You're muted, Zion.
There we go. I'll just share a few ideas, and then I'm gonna have to jump off to go to work. But yeah, these are all really fun subjects that I'm sure we've all pondered over our entire life, you know. And my simple thought is and thing that I've always been kind of working towards, which is very similar to what Michael's working towards, which is basically like we're all looking for the answer, right? But I mean, we're being downloaded that answer every day. You know, the universe is feeding our spirit with the light from the sun and the air, the elements, right? They surround us, they empower us, they energize us, you know. And that, I think, is the biggest thing that the world's disconnected from. You know, it's not the message that we all have, it's the living life that we were all given, you know, from the universe. And if there's a way we can interpret that, download that information, this quantum information, you know, just the very essence of how a light particle works and how languages emerge, how and why we're communicating, expressing that scientifically, I think is at the essence of pure truth that resonates in every living being on the planet. And that is not something that is arguable. You know, we can detect a photon particle, we can vortex water, we can charge that water, we can charge our thoughts with consciousness and love, and propagate that outwards to re-entrain, reprogram our consciousness. Instead of what's going on in the world, right, we're being filled with bullshit, filled with toxicity, bad ideas, selfish ideas, a selfish world. Really, the new world is just health and consciousness and channeling that divine energy and expressing it in our own forms and ways through a multitude of possibilities, because AI is here. Everyone has their path, their life path story to tell. And I know that's a lot of what Michael's work involves, is showing that life path, right, Michael? Like understanding how we are made, how we function, and how gravitational forces, frequency, and consciousness forces affect us. And that to me is really exciting. Like that's the jam session of decrypting how we exist and turning that into a creative art form, so that not only everyone can participate, science can, you know, scientists, engineers, artists, and we can express that in a creative way, so that it tells an infinite story of empowerment and an abundance for all. But that's what I thought I'd share in short.
Well said, Zion. Thank you.
Yeah, namaste.
Namaste.
All right, awesome.
Sorry. I think since we're at the end of the segment, I'm not going to open up what I was going to, because I think it's a longer discussion, but it was about fairy tales and the state of the human being in terms of dreaming, how we connect to the astral, not just the physical, and that these stories are coming from our experience in the astral realm. And I'll just read one little thing that I love, is that one thing we can say about fairy tales is that they happened once upon a time. And if they did not perish, these fairy tale experiences are still alive. And that if we get too caught up in and entangled inwardly with the physical plane, then for us, the fairy tales have been dead for a long time, or remain, or are dead. So with that, thanks, Michael, so much. Always wonderful hearing your creative imagination at work.
Thank you, Melissa. And you may have just seeded, maybe, I'm going to consider it, maybe the topic for next week might be enchantment. Maybe. Think about that. Yeah. Re-enchanting the world. Okay, yeah, thanks so much. I don't have a whole lot more to say. You know, that was, again, just a brief introduction to this notion of reframing. It's just a useful tool. We'll probably come back to it again sometime. And that's all I have to do for now.
Awesome, Michael. Well, you're batting 1,000 here at the block party. So keep on coming back, Slugger. We need you here. We need
Thanks, Jamie.
to recreate a new story for humanity. Beautiful. Awesome. Well, feel free to stick around, come and go. I know you're busy, got a lot of logs on the fire, but this is your home,
you.
Michael, so just come whenever you feel like it. Come and go.
Thanks, Jamin. Thanks. I'll probably drop out pretty soon, but I'll stick around and see what the next talk is like.
Sure, sure. And I just want to check in with Dylan. I'm going to go ahead and stop this recording and then start a new one. Please remind me to restart.